Hello, Calaveras County, and welcome to another edition of Mondo Calaveras. I'm your host, Mike Taylor. Now, I actually toyed with the notion of calling this church chat because you're going to see today's guest and you're going to think, holy cow, Mike, what are you doing? And holy cow is an interesting euphemism. But my guest is Pastor Dave Kinney. Pastor, it's wonderful to have you again.
Thank you.
And the reason we have you here is our last two shows with you were discussions of your trip to the Middle East and kind of what you were able to observe and bring back from that trip. And what we wanted to do this time is kind of dive into a little bit of your area of expertise in regards to the religion of Islam.
Sure.
And so, kind of, why don't you take it a little bit here, and I'll jump in and play layman as we go, and we'll see what happens.
Well, thank you, Mike. I appreciate that. It's such a joy to be back on your show again, too. And I think a lot of people need to understand the real basics of how the Koran works. Mm-hmm. And again, how I got involved in this several years ago was a series that I did on Islam in my church at First Baptist Church in Angels Camp. And I was intimidated by a Muslim and it really tried to stop me from doing this series on what it was titled the Invasion of Islam. Mm-hmm. And because of that, then it made me really want to get into figuring out what's behind the drive of most Muslims today, especially the ones that you're seeing on television. Mm-hmm. What is really driving them? What really is their mindset? And so that's how I got started in this. And so today I thought it might be interesting for your viewers to understand how the Quran really does work for a Muslim. Okay. And so one particular thought is you hear a lot in our media, and you hear it from a lot of Muslims in America, and they will say, well, Islam is a peaceful religion. Mm-hmm. I'm sure you've heard that before, and most of your viewers have probably heard that. And I want to take issue with that particular statement for just a few moments, if I can. Okay. And I want to begin with a particular way that Muslim scholars interpret the Quran. Okay. Now, just so everybody knows, the Quran was the so-called inspired word of Muhammad from Allah, and given to him during about 32 years of his so-called ministry that started in Mecca, and then for about 12 years there was no real growth in Islam. There was no real acceptance. He kind of left Mecca defeated. And so then he went to Medina. And at Medina, everything changed with the way that Muhammad saw people, the Jews, the Christians, and even Arab tribes. And so the revelation started to come to him. What's striking to me in studying the Quran is the revelations that came to Muhammad in the first part of his ministry in Mecca, and then the revelations that came to him in the last portion of his ministry in Mecca, in Medina. Okay. And so the ones that came to him in Mecca were very peaceful verses. Okay. They were the ones that, hey, you know what, we can get along. We can get along here really well. As a matter of fact, I just want to give you a couple of quotes here from a couple of peace verses from that particular first part of his ministry. Surah, which means chapter in Arabic, 2:47 says, O children of Israel, remember my favor when I bestowed on you, and that I preferred you over mankind. Now that's Muhammad speaking about Jews, all right? Then also in that segment of his ministry, in Surah 2:62, he says, those who believe and those who are Jews and Christians, and whoever believes in Allah and the last day and does righteous deeds, shall their reward be with the Lord, or with Allah. On them there shall be no fear, and there should be no grief. Okay, now those are along with probably over 245 other peace verses that were communicated to Jews, to Muslims, and Arab tribes in Mecca. Okay, now those were not received, And there were no major converts.
Okay.
And as a matter of fact, he was pretty much persecuted for that first half of his ministry. So he picks up and leaves and goes to Medina and spends the last part of his ministry there. And in Medina, everything changes. Everything changes. Here are some examples. You just heard a couple of Quranic verses. Well, these are some of the verses that came to him in Medina, and in Surah 5, 7, and 78. Those children of Israel who disbelieve were cursed by the tongue of David and Jesus and Mary. That was because they disobeyed Allah. And then he goes on to talk about Jews turning into monkeys and needing to be punished. Surah 5:60. This is right out of the Quran. Quote, regarding the recompense from Allah, those Jews who incur the curse of Allah and his wrath, he transformed into monkeys and swines, end quote. As far as Jews and Christians must become Muslims, in Surah 385, remember in Mecca, it was, hey, we're all happy here, and we're going to get along here. Everything changes. Then he says in Surah 385, and whoever seeks a religion other than Islam, it will never be accepted of him, that is Allah, and in the hereafter, he will become one of the losers, end quote. Remember now, Jews, according to the book, in Mecca, everything was great about being the people of the book, they were called. But now everything changes. In Surah 5:13, they, the Jews, changed the words from the right places and have abandoned the good part of the message that was sent to them. So major contradiction here, because in Medina, in Mecca, the book was okay, but now it's not.
I was going to say, from somebody standing wholly outside of this, it sounds like, well, nobody was joining the church, so I'm now just going to get angry at everybody.
You know what, Mike? I think you said it exactly accurate, because that's just what was happening.
Because if you're not going to join, then you're cursed, just because I said so.
Correct.
And and we've talked about this, that I'm not atheist.
I understand.
I acknowledge that something had to start this great experiment going, but calling it an experiment to me is kind of for a reason, because I think we're sitting on a giant shelf somewhere, evolving however this universe is supposed to evolve. And where humans get involved and start swinging their words around and using those words as they get into bigger and bigger tomes as weapons just rubs me the wrong way, and everybody does it. So I'm really interested now to see that in his own book, it's, hey, we're all cool, and oh, by the way, you're not joining me, so now we're not so cool.
It gets even worse.
Oh, I can imagine.
Because in Surah 9, 5, and 6, this is what we're seeing on the television as we speak. Quote, the punishment of those who wage war against Allah and his messengers and strive to make mischief in the land is only this, that they should be murdered or crucified, or their hands and their feet should be cut off on opposite sides, or they should be imprisoned. This shall be as a disgrace for them in this world, and in the hereafter they shall have a grievous chastisement from Allah, end quote. Now, what do we see on television? Crucifixions, beatings, mass murders, things of that sort. Where did ISIS and others like ISIS, Boko Haram, get this? Mike, I believe they got it from the Quran. Now, what's really important is for your viewers to understand what is called the law of abrogation.
Okay.
The law of abrogation is a Quranic way of understanding the Quran and interpreting the Quran.
Okay.
Abrogation means to change or to nullify. Okay. And so, according to the Quran, the law of abrogation is something that is taught and something that is widely accepted. For example, in Surah chapter 2, 106, when we cancel a message or throw it into oblivion, we replace it with one better or one similar, end quote. Okay? Now remember, Mecca and Medina. Okay? Surah 16, 101, God abrogates whatever he wills, end quote. Surah 1786, if we please, we could take away what we have revealed to you, end quote. Meaning that simply, whatever we say, later on cancels out. So my point here is that the peace verses that were given to Muhammad in Mecca are canceled out by the war or the sword verses in Medina. Okay? Now, this is not only in the Quran, but it is also found in their other writings that are called the hadiths.
Okay.
The hadiths means to report. And they were written after the death of Muhammad when he died in 632.
Okay.
And these experts, these followers, family members, uncles, cousins particularly, wrote about the life and interpretations of the Quran. And so the hadiths are very important. In fact, if you don't follow the hadiths, you're not a good Muslim. Okay?
Okay.
And even the hadiths quote this, because one hadith says, abrogate every agreement of peace between the prophet and any idolater, every treaty and every term. Simply meaning that at any time you can cancel out any kind of agreement that you made with somebody with something else on a whim. And most of the time, it's for the most negative. Now, I'm not just quoting from the Quran, but I can also give you quotes from major Islamic scholars that promote this in their schools and in their seminaries, so to speak. One hadith particularly by a Muslim scholar by the name of Abu al-Shakar, considered by Islamic theologians as a very reliable source on the Prophet's life. And he says in his hadith, quote, the messenger of God abrogated some of his commands by others, just as the Quran abrogates some parts of it with others, end quote. Now that's a huge statement.
We're getting into I'm rubber, you're glue, whatever I say bounces off me and sticks to you kind of territory here. It sounds like it sounds like a spoiled brat on a playground. And now I'm going to move to a question here, because right after 9/11, because even though folks like yourself and some of us watching the world as we seem to understand it, we could tell that there was a lot of unrest. Seems like a silly word anymore because we throw it around like cotton candy anymore. But there was a lot of unrest in what we would call here in America the Middle Eastern countries. And we knew there was much disagreement between Palestinians and Jews and Muslims and Jews, and we knew something was going on. And then 9/11 happens, and we had heard all along that the West was the big enemy because, we're just us, and that makes us bad for whatever reason is buried in the Koran. So 9/11 happens, and the day after, I spoke with a man here in Calaveras County who's from Yemen, and he's a Muslim, and I said, who are these people? Who are the perpetrators? Who are the folks who hold this grudge, for lack of a more detailed way to say it? And he equated it, and I'm not going to attack Christianity, but he, in my brain, made a pretty good analogy. He said, there are people who are taking in the Quran certain verses, certain stanzas, certain chapters, whatever you want to call them, and that's it. There we go. That's what we're going to, pile our souls onto. And he equated it to our Christian right wing here in America. Which in my brain is the folks who are so zealous in their enthusiasm, and I don't begrudge anybody their faith. But when you start trying to force it onto others, then I have a problem with it. I appreciate the old Kevin Costner film. If build it, they will come. And most of the Christian churches, that is their notion. You build a church and people show up, and then a congregation is built. And then we have these other religions that have a much more angry mindset, it seems. And the Quran, again, at 9/11, we saw this, holy cow, what's going on? Why did this happen? And why do these people hate us so much is really kind of the thing. And so what would our natural reaction be here in America? Well, we're going to automatically hate all of them. And so we end up with this intransigence where nobody's going to move because everybody's wrong, because we're right. So where is the common ground, or can any be found with these two factions? And for now, let's call them Christianity and Islam.
That's a very difficult question to answer.
I know.
Because it probably depends on where you come from. In particular, if you're asking the person in the Middle East that same question, let's say a Muslim, there is no common ground.
Yeah.
There is no common ground. You ask ISIS, is there a common ground? There is no common ground. You ask the Muslim scholars in Egypt and around the world in their Muslim schools and colleges, and you ask them that same question, and there is no common ground. Because remember, Islam is destined in their mind to be able to take the world over, and to be able to set up a worldwide caliphate, as we're seeing some of that try to take place with ISIS today.
Sure.
Now you ask the Muslim in America, is there common ground? And certainly that Muslim will say, yes, there is. But may I remind you that most Muslims, and I'm absolutely right on this statement, most Muslims do not know what their Koran says.
I can imagine.
Most Muslims do not know, do not read it. In fact, they don't read it in mosque. And it's not only just been in the last 10, 15 years that finally the Quran has been put in English and other languages other than Arabic. And so it's become very hard for Muslims to read and to understand. And by the way, when you read the Quran, it's not a real exciting book to read. It's very hard. It doesn't flow very well, and it's not even in sequence either, which is difficult on that.
Sure.
It's broken down very interesting. So, to answer that question, it really depends on where you were in answering that question. In the world, because it's a vast difference of how they see it in the Middle East and in the Far East, where Indonesia, where Islam is growing very fast. In fact, Indonesia has the largest population of Muslims in the world. Yeah, and it's growing radically. If you look at where Islam is growing radically, it's growing radically because it's actually going by the Quran literally. The Middle East, in Africa, parts of Africa where Islam is growing very fast, and then if you look at it in Indonesia and other places, it's growing very fast. They take it literally.
And is it because, and I don't want to say they're picking low-hanging fruit, that's not really where I'm going with this, but is it because to attract people to the religion, they're feeding off of the suffering that's already in these places? Because Indonesia isn't exactly the best place on the planet to live, according to folks who live there. So, with all these difficulties and strifes and governmental problems in those countries, is that what it is? That this religion kind of swoops in and makes them feel strong because it acknowledges they feel like the bottom of the carpet? Or?
I think that's some of it, because we've talked before where in most of these Middle East countries, the unemployment rate is skyrocketing. And there's not a lot of opportunity. And so it almost looks good to put on a belt and blow yourself up and go to heaven with your 72 virgins and all the wine that you want to drink, things of that sort. If you look at the living conditions in most Muslim countries, they're horrendous, absolutely horrendous. And they're living as if they're in the 7th century still. It's really amazing. And why is that? Because most of them are still going literally by the Quran. They're interpreting exactly as I shared here, and I could go on and on with other Muslim scholars.
Is it clerics' interpretations that are getting everyone in trouble? Or is it really written down this way in the book and not subject to interpretation, and it's just here's how it's going to be, and you just have to hate the West?
Both are correct.
Okay.
It is promoted heavy in the mosques by the clerics, and I found this to be true on my last trip to Israel, by the way. I found that very fascinating that you mentioned that. But also, because these people are very ignorant of what the Bible, what their Bible says, what the Koran says, they don't know what it is. And most Western Muslims, when I've confronted them with Surah 9 and crucifixions and things of that sort, and they're appalled that it's in there because they didn't think it was there.
They didn't think it was part of...
Or they thought that Christians put it in. No, we didn't do that. That's silly. That's silly. Okay, and so when you see a lot of this being spread by the clerics in the mosques and in the schools, some of the largest schools, particularly the University of Cairo in Egypt, the largest school for clerics today, and the radicalness that is coming out of that is really scary, really frightening. And then you have Saudi Arabia with Wahhabism, which is another form of Islam that is literally pushing a very, very dangerous part of Islam in the world.
Now, go a little bit more into that. What is, because that one I haven't heard of.
Wahhabism? Yeah. Wahhabism it came to be about the 9th century, and it came from Saudi Arabia, and it is still a way of interpreting the Quran.
Okay.
And you see it still today. For example, I just heard on the news this past week that they have new laws in regards to homosexuality. If you are homosexual in Saudi Arabia, it is a death sentence. And you know why? Because of what Muhammad taught. And they're only going by what Muhammad said.
Okay. And
what their clerics say. Because remember, the word Islam means submit. Okay? So if you're an Islamist, if you're a Muslim, you submit to Allah, to clerics, and so on. And it makes it for a very dangerous situation.
So what they say goes. You can't question it.
Absolutely. Don't even try to leave Islam. I was I had a taxi driver drive me around Israel, around Jerusalem, Palestinian, and I just happened to ask him about what is called mercy killings. Which is, again, in the Quran, Surah chapter 2 talks about mercy killings. That is, if somebody leaves the faith, then you have every right to be able to end their life.
Go save them from themselves, so to speak.
Absolutely.
Thus the term mercy killing. That's where
exactly. That's why you see people having to leave countries rather drastically because they convert to Christianity. And it was fascinating listening to this driver because I did ask him, if your daughter, and he has a daughter, and if she converted to Christianity, would you see that as absolutely necessary and in some aspects honoring your faith? And he agreed with me.
Wow.
100%. And I said, you could actually do that to your daughter?
Yeah.
Absolutely, because of the dignity of Muhammad. That blew me away, Michael.
That's really interesting. That unfortunately, you're the representative for Christianity here, and in my head, Christianity doesn't get too many brownie points either because it has perpetrated some incredible atrocities over the couple thousand years it's been around. And a lot has been done. And I guess this is where I'm going with this. Honest, there's a question here somewhere. Religion. Why do we need it?
We don't.
Thank you.
We don't need religion.
We really don't. Because
religion has literally destroyed civilization.
Religion is a completely human thing. And in my mind, it's man-made because people needed an explanation for why they're here. Now, I could give them an answer for why they're here, but that involves them going back to about 8th or 9th grade, and they have to go to sexual education. But that's why we're here, to be very blunt about it.
Absolutely, I agree with you 100%.
And so beyond that, in my mind, there's just that one rule, and I think we call it the golden rule because it's one that's held to the highest standard, and that is you do unto others as you would have them do unto you. I don't want you stealing my stuff, so I'm sure as a heck not going to come over and steal yours.
Right.
And I don't want anything to happen to my wife, so I don't want anything to happen to yours. And all of these things all the way down the line from something as simple as stealing a piece of gum to taking someone's life. And so in my mind, religion has so clouded people's thinking, obviously, now we're talking about a father who would kill his daughter because she converted to a different religion. I'm sorry, but if somebody here switches to Scientology, we just kind of go, oh, I'm sorry, and let them move on. Yeah. But they've made that choice, and, that's one of the beauties in the United States of America is we can choose any of these things called religions and, I guess, choose to effectively pollute our own brains with what they may or may not teach as good or bad. Is there a place online, I'm sure you end up, there's so much information online. Are there sites that you go to that help you sort of examine this from a I guess, wiser point of view than just the zealotous point of view?
Yeah. And there is so much information out there today, but most people are academically lazy, unfortunately.
Yeah. We want the Wikipedia version, not the version I have to read.
There are so many good references out there. One source that I would recommend to anyone, and that is an author by the name of Robert Spencer. He is an amazing researcher on Islam. And has done an amazing work on many different aspects of it. And he's very, very respected by the United States government. He does all kinds of work with the government, CIA, FBI, things of that, to be able to inform throughout the time. He does a great job. There's others that are out there. Joel Rosenberg does a great work, and he's a Jewish man. And he writes a lot about the Jewish history. It is amazing the information that is out there for people to be able to really get educated. But we do not need religion. Religion has destroyed us. Yeah. What we need is a relationship.
Yeah, that ultimately is.
We need a relationship with God, and we need a relationship with one another. And religion, unfortunately, completely destroys it. I don't categorize Christianity as a religion because it really is built around just a simple 10 Commandments and a relationship building with God, and God building a relationship with us. In no other religion do you find that. None.
Okay.
None.
And you don't necessarily have to submit.
That's exactly right.
You're basically agreeing to go along with.
There is no savior in Islam, by the way. Muhammad was not a savior. He never even did a miracle. Did you know that? In Islam, it's based basically on your behavior. If you're 51% okay, you're in.
You're okay. Well, folks, you and I can keep working on ourselves, but I would suggest we do it on our own. But I want to thank you, Pastor Dave Kinney, for joining us again. Very informative, and we will all work much harder to get along much better, won't we, ladies and gentlemen? I'm Mike Taylor. Join me next time on Mondo Calaveras. Thanks for being here this time. Enjoy.